In tonight's primetime focus, crime does pay. Earlier this year, a man named Andrew Paul Johnson was convicted on 5 charges, including child molestation. His victims were a child under 16 years old and another under 12. We were scared, one of the victims testified, according to trial records obtained by NPR. Like, we didn't realize that this stuff was not okay. There's something else that you should know about Andrew Paul Johnson. He was a rioter on January 6th, pardoned by Donald Trump. According to a police affidavit introduced in court, Andrew Paul Johnson told the 2 children that he was expecting millions of dollars from President Trump and that if they didn't say anything, he would leave them part of that money in his will. At the time that he made that promise, there was no such fund, but there is now. This past Monday, the Department of Justice announced the creation of a fund worth nearly $2 billion. January 6th insurrectionists, including that convicted child molester, are potentially eligible for part of that money. A few months ago, we did our first story on the January 6th rioters and what they were up to now. Here at MS Now, we found over a dozen January 6th defendants who were facing new and resurfaced legal problems. Now, sadly, we have 4 more names. Ryan Nichols from Texas, arrested 9 days ago after authorities say he followed a man out of a Texas church to the parking lot and threatened him with a gun. Brian Betancourt, a self-described white supremacist who was arrested for filming himself touching the hair of multiple women on public transit. Jake Lang, this charming man who tried to burn a Quran and has emerged as a prominent figure in the white nationalist movement. And of course, Andrew Paul Johnson, the man we introduced to you already. So while you're paying for groceries and gas and childcare, those pardoned insurrectionists, including child molesters and convicts, they might be in line for those January 6th stimulus checks, courtesy of President Trump. Joining us now to discuss is Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont. She sits on the House Judiciary and Budget Committees. Congresswoman, is there anything that Congress can do to make sure that a convicted child molester like Andrew Paul Johnson can never receive taxpayer money from this fund?
Yeah, Catherine, I'm so glad that you and your team at MS Now are covering this case. We've been talking about a lot in judiciary. A number of the folks who were pardoned by the president, given full pardons, as you said, they have been arrested on child abuse charges, some on child pornography charges, others on vehicular manslaughter, another for threatening the life of Hakeem Jeffries. So these people are creepy. They're dangerous. They should still be behind bars. They should not be receiving any kind of payment as reparations for the atrocities they carried out against our country. So you asked what can be done. Well, we're going to try to use every single tool at our disposal. So along with the ranking member, Jamie Raskin, we did introduce a piece of legislation last week that would forbid the federal government from using taxpayer dollars to pay out to these criminals. It also bars settlements from Treasury to give any of these January 6th insurrectionists any funds from the federal government. And we're going to be pursuing that. We also, in committee the other day, we lost the vote by 1 vote. We were trying to subpoena Todd Blanche, of course, the president's former personal attorney, now acting as Attorney General. We moved to subpoena him and also Treasury Secretary Bessent about what they knew. The setting up of this slush fund is patently illegal. And what is going to be so challenging for us is we can fight them in a court of law. And certainly we have 2 former Capitol Police officers, Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges, who are also suing the federal government over this. But of course, the wheels of justice turn very slowly. The most immediate way to deal with this atrocity is for members of the House and Senate on the Republican side to say no. And we saw some of that last week before we were gavelled out. But look, they should be attaching amendments to the bills that are moving through the reconciliation bills. That is the quickest way to put an end to this. And we heard from House member Representative Fitzpatrick last week, as well as at least half a dozen Republican senators that they had real problems with this. And so they need to put their money where the mouth is. They need to strip this out. They need to put language in that says this will not happen. And I just want to remind viewers, these are the same people who would not allow a plaque to Capitol police officers to be hung in the Capitol to honor their sacrifice. And now they're considering giving reparations to the people who beat Capitol police officers and ran rioting through our most sacred halls, the halls of our democracy. And so, again, we're going to be trying to use every single tool. But the fact that we even got here tells you all you need to know about this administration. Trump only cares about two things. We know he cares about money. The second thing that he cares about is loyalty. And this is another way for him to continue to fan the flames of his base, his foot soldiers. And I will not give him, on my watch, the money to continue to pay out to these people for their craven loyalty. It's dangerous. Absolutely.
Congresswoman, can I ask you on that point that you're making there about the things that Trump cares about? You know, he's not exactly someone who likes to just give free money out to his supporters. If anything, he actually likes to make money off of his supporters. He sells them overpriced merch, cell phones that may never arrive, that kind of thing. And so I guess, what do you think the larger project here is? Why does why would the president's allies want these particular people, want convicted criminals, want people involved in things as disgusting as child abuse, to have money that experts warn they may use to, restock their weapons and other sort of strange gear and material that these groups amass? I mean, what's going on here? This is not a president who likes to actually give his money away to other people for no good reason.
Antonia, he is trying to create his own personal army ahead of the midterms. I believe that most sincerely. These are people who will do anything for this man. They have shown that they will attack the Capitol to try to put an end to the peaceful transfer of power. These are people that still continue to not deny that President Biden was the rightful president. They are already meddling ahead of the midterms by seizing ballots from the 2020 election. This is a part of a concerted effort to continue to intimidate the American people so that he can deploy these people, especially in the lead up to the midterms, to get people to stay home and to not vote. I can't express it to your viewers in any other more direct way. He has been trying since the 2020 election to create his own personal army of foot soldiers that will do anything for him.
Let's say, Congresswoman, that the Democrats do manage to take control of the House and the Senate in the midterms, or if a Democrat does become president in 2028. What should they do? How can they rectify this moment if, in fact, Donald Trump steamrolls his way to this fund and, as you suggest, perhaps creates a personal army of foot soldiers? What is it that the House, the Senate, and potentially a Democratic president can do to rewrite not only the narrative around what has happened on January the 6th, but also to right this injustice?
I really appreciate your question, Eamon. As a former history teacher, I can tell you, it's going to take us generations to come back from where we are right now. It really is. And I hate to have to say that to my constituents. The damage is so profound when you look at the extent to which Americans no longer believe that we can have a free and fair election, when they doubt any information that's coming from the federal government right now, because you have a sitting president that continues on his own social media platform and in his daily press conferences to lie to the American people about things large and small. So there are multiple ways that we have to look at this. This is the work that we're all going to have to do as Americans as people who still believe deeply in this democratic project, we're going to be having to do that work, that very hard work, day in and day out. And in terms of Congress, we're going to have to be holding hearings, use the subpoena power, which is why it's so important that we are back in the majority. And honestly, I know that we're going to turn a page on this, and Republicans are going to come to us. They are going to want to pretend like they never had anything to do with this man. I do not believe long-term Democrats are going to be the only one who are going to try to purge this from our government. It has been incredibly damaging, not just for us as Americans in terms of our belief in the democracy. He has devastated our economy. He has destroyed 90 years of goodwill across the globe towards Americans. So this is going to take generations to rebuild, but we have to be fearless in doing it.
Congressman Becca Balint, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.